can do the roll call. Mm-hmm.
Does she need to? Does she need to? No, she's not organized.
Because we haven't been public session.
Good afternoon. My name is Gillian Balaban and I am Senior Coordinator Governance Relations at GRI. Welcome to this meeting of the Global Sustainability Standards Board, known by its acronym the GSSB, being held on 18 October 2023. This in-person meeting is being hosted from Amsterdam, the Netherlands. Please note that all public GSSB meetings are being recorded, and you can find the audio recording on the GSSB website, along with high-level summaries of previous GSSB meetings. We will be joined this afternoon by various standard division colleagues. We will now start with a roll call. Chalundra De Silva.
Present.
Thank you. Deborah Ing.
Present.
Galia Tsankova. Oh, okay. We'll come back to Galia. Julie Genuardi.
Present.
Jeff Robertson.
Present.
Jennifer Prinsing.
Present.
Joseph Martin.
Present.
Peter Colley.
Present.
Vincent Kong.
Present.
And GSSB Chair Carol Adams.
Present.
Thank you, everyone. GSSB members Corley LaRue and Anna Nefedova send their apologies, and GSSB members Laura Donna Carter and Kim Schumacher will join shortly. I'll now hand over to the Chair, Carol Adams, to open the meeting.
Thank you, Gillian, and welcome to everybody on the second day of our GSSB meetings, the first public session today. I'm going to hand over to Margarita, staff member at GRI, to talk to us about the GRI topic standard project for climate change.
Thank you, Carol, and thank you, everyone, for being here at this presentation. So I will start my presentation with an overview of the timeline for you to see. So we just completed the technical and editorial review for the drafts of the project. The next step for us will be the last technical committee meeting before the public commenting period that will take place next week on Thursday. We are then planning to present the drafts to the GSSB for your approval in the next meeting in November. And then upon your approval, the public commenting period will start from November, leveraging also on COP28 in December until the end of February next year. And then next year, we foresee that the analysis of the comments and additional technical committee meetings will run in Q2 and Q3. And then the objective is to present the final standards for your approval in the GSSB meeting in Q4 2024. This is to share an overview of the structure with all of you. There will be two drafts, one on climate change, which is made of 10 disclosures. 4 disclosures are updated from the existing GRI 305 emission standards, and 6 disclosures are new. And one energy draft that is composed of 5 disclosures with 1 new management disclosure and 4 disclosures that are updated from the existing GRI 302 energy standard. This is an overview of the climate change draft So as I just mentioned, there are 6 new disclosures: a management disclosure on transition plan, a management disclosure on adaptation plan that incorporates some elements of GRI 201 standard disclosure number 2 that was part of the scope of this project, a topic disclosure on just transition, which is currently under finalization, a topic disclosure on GHG emissions reduction target that incorporate elements of the inventory methods that was previously included in the disclosure number 5, GHG emissions reduction of the existing GRI 305 emission standard, and a topic disclosure on GHG removals, and another one on carbon credit, with the objective to increase transparency regarding the use of removals and credits within our organization climate mitigation strategy. For what concerns the energy standard draft, it includes 5 disclosures and management disclosures on policy and commitment. And then the remaining disclosures are built upon the existing GRI 305 energy standard and EN5 disclosure, reduction of energy consumption, that incorporates disclosure 3024 and 3025 of the existing GRI 302 energy standard. And this is the overview of the structure and the disclosures. So to give you more details on the subtopics of the drafts, the standard draft covers not just technical issues on GHG emissions accounting and energy consumption, but there is a great focus on social aspects related to climate change in particular, such as just transitions and the impacts associated with transition and adaptation plans, but also associated with the reuse of GHG removals and carbon credits. The focus in the climate change draft is also in the climate and biodiversity nexus. And the focus of GRI on the impacts and social aspects associated with climate change and the interrelation between climate change and biodiversity is unique in the current landscape, I would say. Another thing to mention is that for the development of this project, GRI collaborated, as you already know, with the Greenhouse Gas Protocol that is part of our technical committee, to align our content on the existing standard of the GHG protocol, but also to align, where possible and as much as possible, the content to the direction of their undergoing update of their standards. So I can go more in detail in the content of each disclosure, but since we have a short time for this session, and I imagine you might have some comments, I'm also happy to stop here and to give space to your comments, and if you want, I can go back then to the details.
Thank you very much, Margarita, for all the work that's gone into this and for the presentation. Does anybody have any comments on this? We've had this paper circulated. Any questions?
Peter here. I will say, I'm going to have, I think, another comment later, but it is certainly welcome to see already in these first early disclosures the shift in emphasis, or the significant growth and updating of the standard to include the social aspects, which are amongst the greatest impediments to action on climate change. Thank you.
If I may, I think that is the most complete document that I never read in terms of climate. So I think that it's a big challenge for the companies, because the majority of the companies don't cover all the topics that are present in this kind of document. But I think that it's a good level of ambition that we have to do. I have a big element that is related to the detail of the relation of the communities, because it's not easy to implement. So I suggest in the future to create some specific guidelines specific on this kind of part that is not easy. And I have always the same thing of yesterday, that I think that just transition covered the majority of the issue, and for sure cover what is already new about just transition, so number of people, etc., etc. I would like, if it's possible in the future, to try to evolve of this kind of KPIs linked to just transition, and I repeat, especially linked to training and upskilling and reskilling, in order to create, not only to measure the people that receive training, in order to give the idea that all the people affected are involved, but to create value through this kind of training. I haven't a specific reference, Margherita knows this kind of thing, but I think that we have to study to new metrics, especially to guarantee that in the companies you have the correct investment on that. Because if you don't demonstrate this kind of link, it's not easy to maintain the same thing. But congratulations, because it's a real complete document.
Thank you very much, Julia. So just to briefly react on both points, so on the details to report the impacts, especially on local communities and people groups in more general, like point taken, like we are aware that some requirements are can be a bit challenging. So if not now, I mean, I'm sure we will receive some feedback, like we will be testing in the public commenting period, asking, especially in the questionnaire, whether the disclosures and the requirements and the guidance are clear or feasible to report, so we can further work in that direction in the most complex items. And for just transition, the point was taken also yesterday. That is a very good suggestion. So for now, we couldn't find out with the technical committee like the authoritative sources of those metrics, because as much as I'm aware, those metrics are maybe under development, but we are very open to further discuss also with the technical committee and through the course of next year as well to try to incorporate a more qualitative metrics on that. So thank you.
Hi, Margarita. Thanks for the presentation and all the work that's gone into these, obviously. I know that the disclosures around just transition are still in development. One question I have when reading them is just a confirmation, I guess. They all make reference to the plan, and the plan, the theoretical plan for each organization is forward-looking, right? So these disclosures for just transition will all be anticipated and forward-looking estimates or basically predictions, is that right?
So thank you, Jeff. So we were discussing this before this meeting because it's a feedback that we already received from one of our peer reviewer. I guess it's a matter of the time frame, right? Because your point is correct. I guess the technical committee direction was that it's written as your transition plan is already in place. Of course, it can get a little bit challenging if you don't have the transition plan and you're developing, but nevertheless, the technical committee wanted to bring on the paper the metrics that you're supposed to report against once your transition plan is implemented and starts creating impacts and outcomes. But yes, but I understand your point. So it's something that maybe we can work a little bit more just to further clarify.
Yeah, appreciate the answer. I think you run the risk of having 20 disclosures, but one thing that comes to mind is because it's currently written as sort of ambiguous about whether it's rearward looking or forward looking. So that would be one recommendation. And then if you do split them out, then you, as I said, run the risk of just having too many disclosure points. So just something to consider as we round out the draft for public exposure.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
Thank you for the hard work on the project. I noted earlier it's an extensive disclosure standard. It's longer, I think, than many of them, but it's a complex topic. My comment is about the straightforward scope 1, 2, 3 disclosures, and appreciate the involvement of the greenhouse gas protocol. I think reporters, you run the risk of them reading this, perceiving as something additional and new. I would say a recommendation to reference the greenhouse gas protocol as directly as possible so that reporters who are already using that, which most of them are, will recognize this as not different, would be helpful.
Yeah. Thank you, Jennifer. That's a very good suggestion, so we can further consider how to make it explicit in the guidance text possibly.
This is Chulendra here, Margarita. Great job on the topic. I went through it earlier as well. And just a quick question on Scope 3. When we define the upstream and downstream channels that we need to consider for Scope 3, do we, I don't know, this is kind of premature, but do we intend to provide some kind of percentage that needs to get captured in the upstream and downstream in the standard going forward?
Yeah, thank you, Chulendra. So it was debated this and decided by the technical committee that the requirement is to report the whole Scope 3 under the Scope 3 disclosure. Then in the target setting disclosure, we do ask to specify whether your whole Scope 3 is covered by the target. But for reporting, the technical committee decided that now Scope 3 accounting has been there for a while and is a good signal in terms of ambition to, require to report the whole Scope 3 emissions. And of course, there is always the reason for omission. In the guidance, we specify in case you're not able to report on some category doesn't apply, then you should explain why. And in case it's not that doesn't apply, but it's just say you cannot collect the data, just to explain what are the steps to collect those data. But all categories are required. Thank you.
This is great work. I just echo everyone here. A question on public policy and lobbying. Does that tie back to sort of public policy and lobbying elsewhere within the organization? I mean, I think some of the big concerns is it'll be, lobbying that goes against their climate change ambitions. So is that covered in how they're supposed to articulate their public policy and lobbying?
Yes, so the idea is that under transition plan, we do ask to report whether your public policy and lobbying activities are somehow in alignment or in disalignment with your commitment within the climate change mitigation. We also reference the public policy topic standard in case the organization already reported under that. But in transition plan, we specifically ask in relation to your climate mitigation commitments and the transition plan.
Thanks.
Thank you, Deborah.
Margarita, you have more slides to go through, don't you? Or this?
Well, yes, but only if you think it's relevant, because basically it's just like the main subtopics covered under each disclosure, and you might have already the chance to have a look. So, I mean, if you think it's useful, I can guide you through that, or not, whatever you prefer.
I suppose I should just make a further comment in on the just transition disclosure. I appreciate Jeff's point about whether the metrics should look forward as much as backward in terms of what are the plans around job creation and job losses and similar. And I do appreciate that social indicators can be hard, data can be harder to gather, but I just want to emphasise that in the debate, I think just transition is strongly on the international agenda now since the Paris Agreement. It did take a long time to get into the global climate negotiations, and it is the case that yes, social upheaval is one of the hurdles to successful climate action. I just want to make the final point, I suppose, is that when we talk about transition, I know that investors can sometimes talk about transition as simply how do we shift capital from one sector to another, and it's not actually about what happens to the people involved in those sectors. So it's very important that whilst we don't always attach the word just to transitional, and just transition is about workforce and community issues, we need to bear in mind that always a transition in this context is not just about shifting capital from a adverse impact area to a positive impact area.
Yeah, Margarita, I think it might be helpful just to talk through the rationale for the just transition disclosures.
Yes. Can I just react to Peter's comment? Thank you, Peter, for the comment. And this also makes me think of something to share. So in the kind of to capture not just like capital movement, but also the impacts on people, but also that it's not just enough to report on the number of jobs that are created. We added in the guidance, for example, also to disclose whether those jobs are the same type. So if they're permanent or non-permanent, it's not just like a number, but also to provide like details on that, and also if those jobs created are created or the the one of they are redeployed, if they are redeployed in the same regions, and if they keep the same characteristics of the ones that were there before. So we're trying, and as we said at the beginning, this is the only disclosure that is under finalization. And I also wanted to add that, of course, we are working together with the labor team on this content, because this also sits within the discussion of the labor project. We are also meeting with the authority sources organization in next week and this week. So yeah, by the time we will provide and share the final draft, I hope you'll be satisfied with what we are covering there. Thank you. Yes, Carol, you were suggesting to go through the main points. Yes, so this is just an overview. So basically, yes, we are including some metrics under the just transition disclosure, among which the job created and eliminated as a result of the organization transition plan, including a breakdown by temporary and permanent jobs. We are also included the number of employees that receive training for up and reskilling, and as we just discussed, we will see if it's possible to add some more information, not just about the number. We are asking to report the ratio of the total number of jobs that have been redeployed as a result of the transition plan of an organization to the number of jobs eliminated as a result of the transition plan. And we are not just only focused on the workers, as we are incorporating a broader definition of just transition. So also how the transition impacts local communities, indigenous people, and vulnerable groups. So we are coming up with some metrics also to try to measure, where possible with the authoritative metrics available, these broader impacts related to a transition that is just.
Okay, thank you very much. And I know you are still incorporating recent feedback, and we look forward to seeing the next stage. Thank you for all the work that you've done on it.
Thank you, Carol, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you. And the next item that we have is to discuss XBRL, and we have Piers Horner and Laura here to do that from the staff side, to talk us through that work, which we're very much looking forward to hearing about. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you very much, Carol. Good afternoon, everybody else. Just left or right, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, so welcome, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Piers Horner. I work on our software licensing side within GRI, but also I'm working on the GRI taxonomy efforts to develop one. For the session this afternoon, we have sort of three aims overall. First, just to provide a general overview of XBRL and taxonomy for anybody in the room who's not particularly familiar with it all. Number 2, introduce the actual project that we are doing within GRI, of course, and its aims and objectives. And then number 3, to also reflect on what some of that might mean for the standards themselves, as it were. I will handle the first 2 points, and then I'll hand over to Lara to cover off the last bit.
Please, could you speak up a little, please?
Yes, absolutely. Is that clear? Yeah. Okay. I shall try and be louder. Sorry. I'll project. Fantastic. Okay, cool. So we're going to start by just talking about XBRL in general. I will caveat by saying that, of course, this is a new project for us as well. So we are also on our own learning curve in terms of XBRL. But in general, XBRL is a coding language that is used in order to enable digital reporting in a form that can be analyzed by other computer programs. So transferring reporting from human readable to machine readable, basically. It provides a framework for capturing data and concepts and the relationships between those things, and enabling the exchange of information between businesses and a consistent comparison of reported data. XBRL on its own is just, as it were, a coding language. It requires to be coupled with a taxonomy in order for it to actually be useful for reporting. And that taxonomy is just essentially a classification system that defines the data that you want to report upon, and, as I say, the concepts that are included within that as well. XBRL supports a wide range of data types, of course, and can handle high volumes of data, as it does in the banking industry, of course. Not necessarily something that we need to handle for sustainability reporting, but is obviously it's a very flexible type of language. And it can also be extended for different adaptations of taxonomies where that is desirable or needed. In terms of its current use, of course, it's used very generally for accounting and financial reporting, and is mandated by a lot of the major regulators around the world. And significantly, of course, for us and sustainability reporting, the 2 sort of major projects of the GSSB standards and of those standards and ESRS at the moment are both being designed as digital by design, basically. So they are creating their own taxonomies to back up those standards. We've got the timelines, or very proximate timelines, for when those taxonomies may start to be used or be available down here as well, with the IFRS Sustainability Disclosure Taxonomy available from next year, and then a year later, likely the digital reporting under ESRS coming in as well. And as actually we were mentioning over lunchtime, GRI has actually worked on its own taxonomy in the past, a long time ago. But at the time, it was the market, as it were, was not ready for it, so to speak. Obviously, because of the existence of the taxonomies for ISSB and for ESRS now, that means that the context within which we're doing this is much different, which is obviously why we've now returned to looking at developing a GRI taxonomy as well. Just very briefly, in terms of reporting using XBRL taxonomies, well, how do reporters actually implement them themselves? Well, they either do so, or they can do so directly, as it were, through their own specialists who are XBRL specialists and can provide the support to be able to provide reporting using XBRL. Or what is sort of preferable and more common in a sense is the inline XBRL, where you actually have a product that enables essentially the tagging of documents directly using a taxonomy, which is the sort of example we have on the right here. That is often enabled. You can either do that obviously in-house, the reporters can do that in-house using dedicated software, or they will obviously purchase kind of professional services to help them actually develop their reporting, basically. And the output, obviously, of this whole process is something known as an instance document, which is an XBRL-based document, which can then also be filed with the regulator or whoever you're filing your report actually with. So, as I said before, obviously, we did work on taxonomy in the past, and the timing was not right, but obviously with the ISSB taxonomy and the ESRS taxonomy now is also a very good time for us to be returning to work on taxonomy for GRI as well. As I put in the first slide here, the digital reporting for sustainability, the foundations for that are now, as it were, being established. So we believe this is absolutely the right time to be working on the GRI taxonomy. And obviously, what we would like that to enable in the future is that GRI not only influences the design of regulation, but then also the tools, as it were, and the reporting tools with which it's then implemented, as it were. We began rework, as it were, on GRI taxonomy back in May. And obviously, because we do not necessarily have in-house specialists working on taxonomy, we have vendors to support us in that process. But that whole process is supported, obviously, by a sort of cross-working between different departments within GRI. So obviously, I'm working on the standards on the licensing side, but Laura is obviously on the standards side, and we have a cross-disciplinary team working on that. The intention is obviously not only to develop the taxonomy itself, but we will also deliver a filing solution for GRI reporting, which will allow for a report repository to be provided within house. Versioning is obviously incredibly important for this as well. So as we get new versions of the standards, to have that feeding through into the taxonomy in future as well is very important. But obviously, as I say, that kind of report repository function is going to be very significant and important for us in future as well. And the last thing that I just put down here was that the taxonomy, in a sense, gives us opportunities in some ways to help drive the actual standard of reporting in ways that we haven't necessarily been able to do in the past. So through the validation of reporting, we can also actually enforce some aspects of reporting under the standards. For example, the requirements for in accordance reporting or the use of sector standards that we haven't necessarily had as much direct influence upon before. So that's another thing that we really see as being important and useful for the taxonomy. I'm rattling through these, but please do stop me if you want any questions. I'll pause before moving to Laura. In terms of our overall timeline, the images up the top there sort of display, in a sense, or represent our process. Of course, we're going from the PDF versions of the standards through to Excel versions, and then those getting translated into XBRL. So we're partway through that process now. The first drafts of essentially the Excel versions of the standards that we've been working on were pulled together at the end of August. They're not in any way finalized, but they are at least there, and we're now working on translating those into actually having a first version of the taxonomy as a whole. We're hoping that will be done by the end of November. We're aiming for that to be done by the end of November. As I'll come on to in future slides, one of the really essential parts of our build, however, is ensuring interoperability and trying to make sure that the standards are in particular, highly interoperable with ESRS, of course. That means, of course, that our work on the taxonomy itself will in some way depend upon the timeline for the ESRS taxonomy as well and the development of that. So after November and moving into the start of next year, we foresee a period of obviously having to align at the technical level between the two taxonomies, essentially. And of course, at some point, we will need to go out for public consultation, both in general and on the technical aspect of the taxonomy. And so that kind of places us basically somewhere within 2024 when we expect a sort of final version of a GRI taxonomy to effectively be available and available for use, as it were, making 2025 the first full year of reporting using the actual taxonomy itself. And as I said previously, Obviously, going forward, that taxonomy will need to be maintained. We'll need to make sure that we can provide updates to different versions as we have updates to particular standards or the introduction of new sector standards as well. So I mentioned obviously interoperability. This is one of the obviously very key points for us to make sure that in terms of that kind of reporting burden, as reporters need to start moving across to digital reporting, that actually we're able to work in sync, as it were, with the ESRS taxonomy as far as possible, and make sure that actually we can ensure that high level of interoperability. Precisely what that means at this stage is not something we're able to define, as it were. We are working very closely with the EFRAG technical teams at the moment in order to actually kind of compare our taxonomies at the sort of disclosure level and figure out what it means, as it were, for the sort of objective of actually having interoperability between those taxonomies at a technical level. So we've started the process of working directly with the EFRAG technical teams on that, and that's what we will be focusing on quite heavily over the coming months. We also have an example of one of the areas in comparison if the board is interested to talk through that a little bit more. And then the final thing that I will say before handing over to Laura is that obviously, this is a key thing for GRI in terms of us enabling digital reporting using GRI, of course. It's a significant development, but there are obviously other possible applications and opportunities for us, particularly around the area of data. If we have a reporting repository, then the data that we can in theory at least kind of pull from that and make use of could be quite a rich repository of data. Lots of potential applications, only some of which I've listed here, of course, around the internal analysis of reporting trends. For example, benchmarking, of course, across different regions, sectors or groups, the sort of partnerships that might come out of that. But then also, I think one of the significant things for us is also about reducing the burden for reporters who then have to share their data with other organizations and other bodies as well. So just how can we make use of that reporting repository in order to enable that in future as well. I'm going to pause there. That's just a very quick. Do you want to have a quick break for questions, or should we jump straight to Laura? Oh.
Thanks very much, Pierce. Obviously, very exciting developments. I have what might be a silly question. What does the interface look like for a reporter, and do they end up with like an XML file, or can you just give me some of the practicalities involved?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we are working on at the moment is the structure, the framework itself, so the XBRL code, et cetera, Once you have that developed, which effectively kind of encodes all of the standards, all the requirements of the standards, which is what we're focusing on, of course, then you need to think about tooling. Yeah. We have within the work currently envisaged, we are intending to produce a web form that will now allow reporters to enter their information, and then for that to then spew out, as it were, an actual XBRL report at the end of it. But I mean, going back to this slide, the idea of obviously the inline tagging is very much where the market expects us to be, I think, and there we will have to work with partners in order to actually enable that, and with software developers who will be able to actually develop that interface for reporters, basically. Right. But I mean, in terms of how it looks, the image on the right here is kind of representative. So you have the report on the left-hand side, as it were, of this interface. If you just imagine this as a browser, you have on the right-hand side is actually the taxonomy and the details of the taxonomy itself. So all the individual data points, for example, that need to be tagged. And as you can see here, I mean, you essentially select, you click on elements of the report itself in order to tag it to a particular item of data. and then that kind of secures your information within the taxonomy.
Got it. Thank you. And are there generative AI suites available to sort of at least give you the first draft of what the machine thinks are all the locations, and then you just fix where it's wrong, kind of thing?
Well, so one of the useful things about this, I don't know is the answer on the AI. I'm sure there are some very enthusiastic, forward-looking software companies out there who are thinking about that, as it were. But one of the things with the inline tagging is that you can the first year is usually the heaviest year in terms of reporting, because you do all the tagging once, but you can carry that over into the next year. And then make amends where you need to. If you're reporting on more disclosures or whatever, you can add to that in the following years. But yeah, sure. I mean, the AI kind of aspect of this is not something we're considering right now, but I think is an important thing that we need to talk about with partners in future as well.
Thank you.
Maybe to this, Bastian, maybe to just add to this, I think XBRL has a reality in terms of tagging documents that have been made available. But increasingly, and you see that on financial reporting side, it is also a byproduct of systems that you have in place that generate data based on standards, right? So in tax filing, for example, in very many countries now, that moves through a system, and in the end, one part of the output is the filing with the regulator, which is XBRL enabled. So it's another click away, right? And I think where we are well positioned is with the many software and tools providers that have built different applications that facilitate reporting processes, and we have to get to the stage that we enable an output and the filing of GI-based information as part of this, right? So that it doesn't become yet another step in our process, but you're organizing information internally already fitting with disclosure requirements, and XBRL is the magic that happens in the background more than anything else. But where it becomes very interesting, I think, is as Piers said, that once you've gone through that process or you've bought into system solutions that enable you to do that, then this is a lot less of a burden now than it was 10, 15 years ago, where everything was retroactive and you basically you looked at a PDF thing and you started to mark it up. That's certainly not when people look to the future, this should be an integrated solution of something, and then not an afterthought, right? But there is, I mean, with this impetus that we have in particular through the single access point in the EU, where corporate filings will have to move not only for sustainability information, everything for very many thousand companies. So the capacity is available in multinationals, because tax filing and other things it has been commonplace to use XBRL, but now it's extending out to also medium-sized and small organizations.
Vincent.
Hi. Thanks for the presentation. Can you explain a little bit more how the GRI taxonomy will help enforce GRI reporters who choosing in accordance or make reference, and one of the main difference between GRI reports compared to other reporting standards is the reporters can choose to disclose some information that they have some not hesitation but technical difficulties and so on. So can you explain some examples maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, here we're looking at the validation of reporting. So the concept being, of course, that if you want to go through the process of actually doing an XBRL-based report, there's also a validation that comes as part of that as well. So, for example, if we have somebody who is essentially saying they are reporting in accordance, well, we can also introduce data points into our taxonomy that essentially capture the requirements, or as much of the requirements as possible, that they would also in a sense have to disclose. And the same with sector standards, for example. Well, you know, if there's a disclosure that they are using a particular sector standard, then we can also actually make sure through the validation that actually they are reporting against those topics that they should be reporting, and if they're not, that they're also including the right level of omission, basically, as well. So, those are the sort of tools that we have, as it were, to also be able to capture much more of the entire reporting framework, as it were, than just the disclosures themselves.
Okay, I have one more.
Peter.
Piers, I think you said you did have a worked example that you could show us.
Indeed.
Okay, good. When I think about data tagging, one of the things I think about is that the GRI has a lot of management disclosures and approaches, and so they're not numbers that or metrics that can be tagged readily. So that's on the management disclosure side of it. But then where we do have metrics, the GRI, in an effort to be flexible and to cater for all reporters, is often lets reporters choose both their numerator and their denominator. I'm just looking at the draft energy standard, and energy produced the numerator can be joules or watt hours or various other things. And when it comes to the denominator, for say energy intensity, there's per employee or per sales revenue or per unit of product, and so on, or per floor space, a floor space ratio. I'm intrigued as to how that's going to be adequately tagged and made comparable when reporters have a lot of choice about their metrics, basically.
It's a very good question, Peter. It's a question that we have a technical forum with both the IFRS and ESRS and other contributors. So there's a technical forum that is convened by XBRL International, where we discuss just these kind of technical issues. On the point that you raise here, which is a very good one, I think you may have chosen the most complex example, but that's also instructive in terms of, as you say, the denominator being flexibility to actually define what that is. I think.
Energy is actually one of the more straightforward ones.
In terms of the denominator, I mean, but yeah, I mean, we're going to have to make a pragmatic choice here. In a sense, we have said through the standards that we want to provide that flexibility, and unless we are prepared, as it were, to return to that point, as it were, well, we're going to have to make sure that the actual taxonomy itself captures the spirit of the standards themselves, and if that means providing flexibility in this space, then we need to encode that in the standards, in the taxonomy itself, as things stand at the moment. I think the question which follows from that, so number one, we need to be able to do that in a way that is consistent with, ESRS, for example, and again, that's why we're talking to them through the technical committees, and it is a challenge that they face as well. Particularly when they're looking at comparisons with different currencies across the world as well. But apart from that, I think then the question is how, if we do end up with a report repository, for example, well, still, is there useful information that we can pull from that for particular sectors or particular industries, for example, that might be reporting using consistent subcategories, as it were, of those different units, as it were. Not sure I've answered you completely there, but I think in summary, it's a difficult area, but it is something we're talking through, and we want to maintain consistency with the best practice in terms of design.
I guess I'll just be looking forward to the examples.
Yeah, sure.
How it works.
Jennifer?
Thank you. Looking at, I think it's slide 38, where you list some possible applications, the last one that says reducing the reporting burden and sharing information with other organizations, that sounds very promising. Wondering if you can just talk a little bit more about who those other organizations might be, and if you've gauged the appetite for sharing through this capability.
Yeah, so I mean, I think on the one hand, we have sort of ratings agencies, obviously, we have the stock markets themselves, or stock exchanges, sorry, where companies have to disclose information and they have to do so individually, as it were. Well, there is the potential there for if all that reporting is aggregated in the same place through our own filing, for us to also manage that kind of transfer of information as well on behalf of the companies. In terms of the assessment, as we said, of the demand and the need for that, I'd probably have to just ask Bastian about that, actually.
I think the way we look at it right now is, as we all know, many of the methodologies that have been developed in ranking and rating, but also many of the regulatory applications that we've seen recently emerging and discussions, they are at least in part based on the GRI standards. So leveraging that link, I think that this is moving us towards automation of the linkage document type of idea. It is not about surrendering ownership of the data for the companies. They can still choose to where they leave the information, but it is importantly about identifying with a base of information and information that you own as part of a GI reporting process. You're able to respond to a certain number of disclosure requests that you're receiving, and enabling that through the taxonomy would reduce the burden for reporters really in that stage. After the release of the report, being sure that the information that is now locked into PDFs mostly finds its way into other applications. Because this is, I think, and generally speaking, the main feedback that we have from reporters, that after a very resource-intensive reporting exercise, there's an even more resource-intensive, oftentimes, exercise of slicing and dicing the data, slightly modifying it and moving it to all kinds of systems. And the more we can use the same set of information to satisfy these information requests, both regulatory or from rankers and raters and other market participants, that would, of course, be preferable. And it is in that space where we started discussions also.
Yeah, very good. It sounds promising. I would suggest another category there might be the business-to-business kind of information, value chain engagement requests.
That's an important point. So for example, where we see widespread application already is for that multinationals have information requests into their supply chain for just a select number of GI disclosures. And through a system like this, you can, of course, automate it in a different way and also consider reporting of potential suppliers. If they have earlier on submitted GI reports, then this information is readily available for the assessment. It is not a separate process anymore.
Just add very briefly as well, I think that's also one of the utilities of the sort of web form, as it were, in future, because you don't necessarily, or the smaller companies may not be able to move immediately to a full digital reporting kind of solution, but actually if you can submit some of your information through a web form, for example, well, that offers the opportunity to be more,
Thank you very much. I think Lara's got something to add, and then we might have some more questions after that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Piers. So next, I just wanted to spend a few minutes to explain what this means for the GSSB and the standards and the role that we envision for the GSSB going forward. And there's three key considerations that we want to bring to you, but as we work on the taxonomy, there's likely going to be more things for us to consider going forward, but we wanted to bring this to you already. The first thing is the issue of interpretation. So, of course, when we develop the taxonomy, we are doing this in line with the requirements of the GRI standards, and we will avoid conflicting or interpreting the text of the standards. But what we are seeing so far is that of course, the standards were not designed with the taxonomy in mind. So when we translate the standards into the taxonomy format, sometimes there are questions or different options for codifying one requirement in the taxonomy. So when those cases occur, we will be coming to the GSSB for advice. So whenever there are different options, we will be presenting those to you. And we will be also making a recommendation about which of the options potentially enables more interoperability with other standards. And at that point, the GSSB may also decide if a standard interpretation needs to be developed for that particular issue, at which point then we would need to start a project following the due process to provide that interpretation. At the moment, we don't know how many or whether we will encounter those issues, but we see that this is a real possibility. So we wanted to flag this already, that this may potentially come your way in the coming months. Yeah, another consideration is the role of the content index going forward once we have digital reporting. As you know, the content index is a requirement for both in accordance and reporting with reference to the standards. And the role of the content index is essentially to give transparency as to which GRI disclosures have been reported and to help the readers find that information. And digital reporting and the taxonomy will enable that. And it will actually enable that in a more granular and accessible way. So there's a question as to the role of the GRI content index going forward. For example, if we are able to provide a web form for companies to submit the data to us, can we take that submission as the content index, or do we still expect companies to produce a GRI content index in the format that we outline in the GRI standards? And another scenario that may be coming up very soon, of course, is in the EU, where digital tagging will be a requirement. We're working with EFRAG to develop a multi-tagging system for the taxonomy so that ideally companies tag the information once simultaneously to both GRI and the SRS. So in that scenario, that may be also a question for us to consider if we can forego that requirement to produce a content index whenever companies have gone through that process of digitally tagging the information according to us. And finally, another thing to consider is due process. So the taxonomy at the moment does not follow the due process. This is not contemplated at the moment in the GSSB due process protocol. And we also work under the assumption that the taxonomy will not change the content of the standards. But going forward, this is something for us to consider as we update and revise the GSSB due process protocol, particularly when looking at other standard setters where this is part of their due process and they have actually a specific process and steps that they have specified for developing the taxonomy. So these are just the things that we wanted to bring to your attention for now. And on the next slide, there's the example that we were referring to. So this is just an example of what interoperability means at the taxonomy level. So here you can see our GRI 27 disclosures on the number of employees and the related disclosure within the SRS. So maybe if we look just at the content that is highlighted in yellow, just to give you one example, here we're asking for the number of employees by region in GRI 27, whereas ESRS is asking for the number of employees by country. So in principle, these two data points are compatible, and GRI reporters can do a breakdown by country to satisfy our requirement, because we leave flexibility to companies on how to do the region breakdown. It could be by country or any other categorization that they would like to. So on paper, these things are compatible, but we also need to ensure that at the taxonomy level, they are compatible.
because in the case of the ESRS, the taxonomy will be codified as a list of countries. For us, in principle, it should be an open, customizable categorization, but we should be able to enable interoperability in the taxonomy. So these are the kinds of things that we need to consider as we develop the taxonomy to ensure that not only on paper, but also digitally, things are compatible.
Maybe just to add to that point, Sebastian, again, I think it induces a level of transparency into that interoperability debate that is very, very healthy. Because sometimes we gloss over, like with statements, that there is a certain level of interoperability achieved in spirit, which in the reality of the reporters is actually not. So having collectively the industry and specifically standard setters and regulatory efforts paying attention to this from the get-go will help a lot, right? Because then you really force any claim about interoperability will be exposed and fact-checked by a taxonomy. So that's I think this needs to be understood as an opportunity rather than something that makes our life more difficult, because in the end, to reduce reporting burden and to have one set of information service very many different use cases, this discussion is the next frontier, and this is where we've fortunately arrived after quite a number of years busy with this. And it is, as you can see in this example, it is a significant amount of work on each and every disclosure and even on subparts of disclosures. But once you're through it, it will give also good input to future standard setting efforts. And if you think a moment about this idea of reviewing and constantly improving, right, then this is a feedback loop that we haven't had because there was no demand on that granularity level. But now it's there, and through the regulatory applications, it's also very much needed. And we see generally also the rankers and raters and others moving in that direction, requesting information in digital format. So there will be multiple factors that will drive us in that direction.
Jeff?
Could I just ask for one point of clarification? I'm assuming the individual data bits within XBRL can be anything like text and Boolean and doubles and everything else, right?
Yes, yes, that's right. Yeah.
Okay. I brought up just because of Peter's question about kind of numerical versus other disclosures. So in a sense, it's kind of irrelevant, the format of the data. It just means that you can't do certain mathematical operations on the text-based responses, right?
Yes, I mean, so the approach we're taking when we look at the actual requirements and how they break down into individual data points within the taxonomy is to also try and separate wherever we can the highly comparable data from stuff that is less comparable. And we sort of have a rating system for how comparable different data types obviously are. So yeah, we're seeking to capture as much data as possible in the highest level of comparability. Right. Except where you have then technical or difficulties around, for example, as Peter was talking about earlier, the definition of the denominator for your energy intensity ratio, for example. There we have a challenge that we have to face for sure. But we need to find a workaround for that, basically.
Got it. Thank you.
This okay, Ganga Sharma. Does this XBRL is compatible with the other reporter organization data tool like through API system? For example, HR system, the information around number of employees, head count. So I'm just thinking from a reporter point of view. So that data is already within the organization in some way or other way. So does this tool is also, from a technical point of view, can import those data with due permission?
So again, what we are designing here is just the taxonomy itself. So it's the framework that will be used for the reporting. the way in which that is then implemented to reporting and how you, for example, where you get your data streams coming from, that will depend in a way, right? So we have all of our, we have partnerships with software firms, for example, who may well wish to use the taxonomy within a software product that pulls in that information from existing systems within companies, and that is integrated into their own product, as it were. We're not providing that solution. As I said before, one of the things that is envisaged is we will provide a web form of input for the taxonomy as well. But we're not going to be responsible for, as it were, joining up those data systems within organizations. We will need to work in partnership with others in order to make sure that there are products on the market that can do that in the most effective ways.
Okay. Thank you.
This is Jennifer Princeton again. I hope I don't reveal an ignorance of what's in our current standards, but do we say anything in the GRI standards about comparability? And are there any concerns there that we're going to imply comparability of data that isn't actually comparable?
I was going to ask Lara if you had an opinion on that, sorry.
Yeah, indeed, it's one of the reporting principles that we have in GRI 3, comparability, which is managed at two levels. So comparability with other companies, but also comparability over time when you look at the performance of one individual company. And of course, that's one of the goals in sustainability reporting. But when it comes to certain data points or to certain areas, comparability gets challenging. It's one of the core principles that we look at in developing the standards. So I think with the taxonomy, there is the risk to think that everything will be comparable, but I think there will still be a level of effort required to understand and assess the data across a number of companies.
To quickly add to that, I think also there it is both for the preparer and for the user of information, it is more transparent how a company has gone about disclosing a particular subject matter in a certain reporting period and how that changes over time. But as part of the solutions that Piers was referring to, that is kind of also on the financial side is I think value add for preparers and information users, because they can go back in time, they see if there's a change in reporting approach. They can also see how they can backtrack that into earlier reporting periods. There is also a lot happening, I think, currently in the methodology space around ranking and rating, where even narrative information is coded into ratios and otherwise, and inducing a bit more transparency of what was the input to this. I think from a preparer perspective in particular is going to be really, really helpful, because then you can supply the right information and you understand how it translates into other applications also.
And if I could just add as one closing comment on this particular bit, that I think this also segues into our own kind of what is the guidance, the training, as it were, and the other services that we could provide both to those who will be supporting reporters to actually develop their reports in future, and of course to the reporters themselves. So there's, we can think outside of just the development of the taxonomy as to, how we can also provide training on the use of the taxonomy, for example, which I don't think we have a firm proposition around that yet, but that's something that we obviously need to think about and need to plan for.
Okay, I think we're all out of questions, and that's been a really good discussion. And thank you very much for the presentations and the work that's gone behind it. Looking forward to seeing how that develops and seeing it in action. Thank you. Oh, go for it.
Are you going to have a pilot testing?
So I think we are. When you say pilot testing, or do you mean actually
with organizations
that
are reporters?
Yeah, well, so that isn't specifically in our timeline yet, but I think that it's an important thing to make sure the reporters have sight of what we're doing and of what it looks like and what it feels like, for sure. So quite how we do that yet, whether that's through just the public consultation process or engagement with our community, or, we haven't quite sort of figured that out yet, as it were. At the very least, you'll have the public consultation and also a sandbox environment in which, obviously, companies and reporters will be able to play with the taxonomy itself. But yeah, if we do, and it would be good, I think, for us to do some direct engagement on this as well, but we haven't sort of got that in the timeline yet quite.
So you mean when you go out to consultation, reporters will have had the opportunity to use it?
Well, we're saying that there's going to be an environment, a sandbox environment, in which anybody can interact with the taxonomy as a whole, as an actual product, as it were.
Prior to responding to the consultation?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. I think we're done with this session then, and we can take a break and come back at 2:30. Thank you all.